At the boundary fence between St Kentigern's and the necropolis proper lies a monument that is both memorial to the area's industrial heritage and a stark reminder of the harsh reality faced by men who daily risk their lives, scratching a living in cramped conditions in the very bowels of the earth, mining coal to fuel the homes and factories of the nation. It was business as usual at Cadder Pit number 15, as the maintenance crew of 26 men working back shift for the Carron Iron Company prepared to descend the shaft. On that fateful Sunday afternoon of August the 3rd, 1913. Little did they know that preceding events would allow for only 4 of them to return and change mining in the North Glasgow area forever. The majority of miners in the Lambhill area worked at one of the coal and ironstone pits owned by Carron, whose mining operations sprawled over the nearby countryside following the route of the canal. Cadder, or Cadder number 15 as the coal pit was known, was situated about 2.5 kilometres north-northeast from the village of Lambhill, and had been worked since the early 1880s, employing 290 men underground. Its downcast shaft, which the men used as the main access by cage elevator, and where coal was drawn to the surface, was sunk about 309 metres deep into the earth. Its main haulage road, or Duke Brae as it was called, which also served as an air intake, ran north-northeast underground, just under 1.5 kilometres from the shaft, directly under the River Kelvin.
About 400 tonnes of coal were drawn to the surface each working day.
Out of the main haulage road, 3 interconnecting side levels branched off in different directions. One of them, number 2 level, leading on the east side to the communications road to number 17 pit, about 3/4 of a kilometre in Mavis Valley. During its day, Pit 15 was considered a modern pit, having the latest electric lighting and water pumping systems installed.
Aye, we had electricity, but on Sundays, for the back shift anyways, they never lit the passageways. Only the area at the pit bottom, but left the power on for the pumps of course, at the far end of the mine. No, we were still using tallow lamps where we were working.
About 114 metres from the pit bottom were 2 small brick buildings with a telephone area between them. Both buildings supported wooden structures made of heavily packed timber props, used to reinforce the pit ceiling, where previously there had been a collapse.
The first cabin was a fireman's office, where log books and other documents were kept, and next to that, the other building that housed the electrical switchboard and controlled the lighting and machinery. Some of us used the cabin area as a cloakroom. Some would take their jackets into the mine. We would wait at the lamping station, fix our lights and have our smoke, and wait for our fire inspector to give us the all clear to get into the mine. Then we'd start our shift proper like. Pit 15 wasn't a fiery pit, There weren't explosive gases, so no restrictions on contraband like tobacco and matches as it was in other pits. And a lot of us didn't light up anyway. We preferred to chew the tobacco, kept our mouths moist and that.
On that ill-fated Sunday, 25 miners on the 3 p.m. back shift, under the charge of Acting Superintendent Fireman Charles Riley, descended number 15 pit and separated into 3 working parties. A relatively small crew, as no coal was being drawn up that day, and whose main purpose was to prepare the mine for the next main shift, due to start at 11 o'clock.
We were the brushers. Most days that is. Our job was road building, We tightened the roof and widened the pavement above and below the worked seam. Blasting and then picking away at it, we'd clear away all the loose material, ready for the cutting crews, hence the name Brusher. "15 years in machine section 1 on the eastern side. Some were working a coal cutter, some repairing the roof. 8 men were in section 2. Oh, and 2 men, Alexander Brown and Hugh McCann, went to work at water pumps at the far end, north of the mine.
We can never be certain how the fire started. Speculations at the time thought it had originated in one of the cabins around 4:30 p.m, either by some failure of the electrical apparatus, or, as the official inspector of mines inquiry attempted to establish later, by an accidental ignition of timber or other inflammable material, either by matches or a used lamp wick disregarded from a miner's oil-burning headlight, or even the naked flame itself.
We were aye careful with our lamps. Aye careful. I defy you to find any evidence that any of our men were responsible for starting that fire.
With so much dry timber for the fire to consume, its flames spread quickly through the cabins, severing the telephone lines, leaving those underground cut off from the outside world, and spreading smoke through the main haulage area and into the airways of the mine workings.
Charlie, Fireman Riley, was out on his duties when he smelt smoke. As any miner will tell you, the consequences of smoke in the pit are dire. Not only the fire itself, but the deadly after-fire, the after-damp. White damp is what we cried it. Carbon monoxide poisoning of the air. There doesn't need to be much of it in an enclosed space for it to be fatal.
As the fire spread, Fireman Riley knew there was not much time. He had to warn the others. He found 3 of the 8 men working in Section 2 and alerted them of the danger. As the men set out to make their escape, Riley chose to depart from them and bravely continued west through the passageways on to level 1. On his way there, he found the 3 brushers from the level 2 team, who had been working about a kilometre from the pit bottom.
Fireman Riley, he didn't know which part of the mine was on fire. He didn't know. But he told the men to get out, save themselves. At this point, he could have left with the brusher's crew and saved himself. But instead, he went back to warn the others.
Under a dense cloud of smoke, foul air, and not knowing the exact location of the fire themselves, the 2 groups of men from each section both headed for the pithead, toward the fire.
Aye, It was a tragedy. They all perished in their effort to escape, succumbing to the deadly white damp. I think Charles Riley, in the last effort to save the men, attempted to open a vent to disperse the poisonous air. They found him where he fell, overcome by the fumes, within a few paces of reaching the airlock door in Connor's level. Before Riley left him to go to Section 1, the three pit rushers, Felix O'Neill, Michael Keenan and Robert Dunbar, noticed smoke creeping towards them from the direction of the pit head, and saw some of it being sucked into the airflow passage of the communications road that led to pit 17. Robert knew the white damp would follow. He had to stay ahead of the smoke.
As an experienced miner and expert navigator of the pit, Robert Dunbar led his group with calm determination on a dangerous journey through a maze of secondary passageways.
The new guy, Felix O'Neill, he was about to pass out, being so affected by the smoke. His comrades would not leave him to die. They held him up and kept shuffling him along. At one point, they saw two men ahead of him, possibly the two men who had been manning the pumps. They cried out to them, "This way!" But the two men disappeared into the darkness, gone toward the pit head, and soon to be amongst the others.
Finally, the three men of Dunbar's group made it into the downcast fresh airway of the communications road to pit number 17. When they surfaced, the smoke was beginning to rise from the shaft.
A quick-thinking engine man reversed the airflow by putting a spade into the steam pipe, sending the smoke and flames back to where they came from. This would also supply fresh air along the communications road for an attempt at rescue. Dunbar wasn't wasting any time, can you imagine? He went back to pit 15 to help out. Some man, what a guy. When he got there, Willie Brown, the night shift fireman, had already discovered the fire in the workings and raised the alarm. They called the County Fire Brigade for Cambuslang. When they arrived there, they saw it was hopeless to do anything to extinguish the fire. In fact, their hose wasn't even long enough to reach the bottom of the shaft.
As the fire raged below ground, barring all access to the machine levels from the pit head, it was decided that the only safe way to carry out a rescue operation was through the adjoining communications road from pit number 17.
At first, a small crowd of relatives and local miners gathered outside pit 15. Most of the local people were at church in Lambhill and Mavis Valley. But when they got news of the fire and that they were going to attempt a rescue for pit 17, hundreds of people ran to the pit head to volunteer, Robert Dunbar included. There was so many for Lambhill running across the fields that the police were called to try and control the crowd. The pit was a terrible place. You just couldn't complain about the conditions. Make trouble and you're out your job, out your house, and you'd get blacklisted. In many ways, we were owned by the company. That's just the way it was. Just keep your head down and get on with it. The sad fact was, neither pit had any rescue brigade of their own. No even basic rescue equipment. Despite this, there was no shortage of volunteers, brave men, both miners and officials, going down while the fire still raged. When the first rescue party tried to pass through the airlock door to access Pit 15, some of the rescuers were immediately struck down by white damp, having to be dragged away to safety, saved by the apparently indestructible Robert Dunbar himself. They were treated by a local doctor for Bishop Briggs, Dr Miller, aided by the county health visitor, Nurse Winchester. Both worked tirelessly throughout the night, attending to the volunteers badly affected. By midnight, the reversal of the air current had begun to take effect, and sections of the mine could be accessed. But it was hours later before it was safe enough for a rescue team to go in with canaries to test for gas and reach the Duke Bray airlock. They found the first bodies there, 5 lying close within a few steps of the door.
Since the early evening, anxious crowds of miners and their families had waited patiently at the pit head for news of the missing men underground. Scanning the faces of the rescue team as they surfaced from the mine, the crowd's pleading gaze met by silence. Any hope of finding the rest of the maintenance crew alive began to fade.
As I said before, we never had our own rescue brigade on site. The nearest one was in Cowdenbeath, about 60 miles away. It took them 4.5 hours to arrive on the scene after getting the alarm at the station, first having to drive to Stirling to make the only crossing over the River Forth at the time. They arrived about 3 AM. First, they attempted a rescue with smoke helmets and bellows. But these proved to be useless, in such long passageways. But once they changed to carrying oxygen tanks, they were able to go deeper into the mine. When they tested the air in the Duke Bray, they discovered it's safe. So normal rescue parties were let back in to retrieve the missing miners.
Shortly after, a silence fell upon the gathering, their worst fears confirmed. As the cage returned the bodies up to the surface, one by one. By 11 o'clock on Monday morning, it was known that only 4 out of the 26 men had survived.
Many of the victims were still in their teens. Brothers John, William and Alexander Brun, and Robert and William Ramsey all came from Mavis Valley. Hugh Anderson from Lambhill House and Patrick Darragh, he's been married for barely a month. One of the youngest, Owen McAloon from Lambhill, a pony driver, only 15 years old, was found dead with his arms wrapped round the pony's neck, both taken with white damp. The last of the missing men, Michael MacDonald, a brusher working in the far end of the Northwest Passage, was found about 11 o'clock against a wall, face downwards, covered in dirt and hidden by dead ponies. Father Mullen began to administer last rites. They turned him over on his back. Lo and behold, they couldn't believe their eyes when MacDonald started snoring loudly. He had survived all that time in a burning pit in a trapped air pocket. A miracle.
With all the bodies now retrieved and the fire burning out of control, they left the pit to burn itself out. From the village hall at Mavis Valley to Cadder Cemetery, the funerals went underway as 7 horse-drawn hearses led a sombre procession along the canal bank. Amidst terrible scenes of anguish, Father Mullen, the local priest in Lambhill, compared the list of the fallen to the roll call of the dead in a battle. More hearses and another funeral march of 11 coffins from St Agnes's Church in Lambhill. The pallbearers carrying their fallen comrades shoulder high to the cemeteries nearby. A multitude of over 50,000 people congregated around the funeral corteges in a public display of grief for the victims and in support of their families. And many offices and factories in Bishop Briggs, Postle Park and Lambhill closed on the day as a mark of respect. The interments took place in cemeteries of different denominations, in Cadder, Ridgeray and Lambhill, each church honouring their own. All the funeral expenses were paid for by the Carron Company, who donated £10 to each widow, about £1,000 in today's money, to help cover costs of their immediate needs, as families, now without a breadwinner, braced themselves for the approaching winter and a future most certainly full of hardship. At Mavis Valley, a village that was purpose-built by the mine company to house its workforce, any widow whose household did not contain someone old enough to work down the pit was evicted from their homes, children and all. One widow was luckier, marrying another miner within a few weeks of the disaster. Her family now at least able to remain within the protecting arms of their community. Although the official report found the company to be in default in their provision of rescue apparatus required by regulations, it was not proven that the lack of these facilities resulted in the men's deaths. So there was no legal obligation on the company's part to continue paying any further compensation. After the disaster, number 15 pit was sealed up, never to reopen. The workforce were allowed to transfer to Mavis Valley, and number 17 pit inevitably became overmanned. The Cadder Pit Disaster, which claimed the lives of 22 men and left behind 13 widows and 41 fatherless children, heralded the beginning of the end of mining north of the canal in Lambhill, and the end of a way of life for thousands of people in the surrounding area. It seems inconceivable to us today how such a vital and widespread industry as coal mining could have been allowed to operate with such disregard to human safety. pathetic that all the deaths in Pit 15 could have been prevented had there been better safety systems installed, as these were all available or attainable at the time. Just over 2 months later, with the news of the tragedy still fresh in people's minds, disaster struck again. On October the 14th, what was believed to be an electrical spark ignited methane gas and coal dust, causing a chain reaction of explosions that ripped through the mine workings at the Universal Colliery at Senghenith, South Wales, killing 440 people. The shock at the carnage echoed throughout every mining community around the world and brought home the plight of miners to a concerned British public. With public pressure mounting against them, mine bosses who had been dragging their heels in implementing the now long overdue safety legislation requirements of the Coal Mines Act of 1911 were now held accountable for any failings. Accountable, that is, it seemed anyway, if you could afford a legal team to prove it. On the centenary of the Cadder Pit Disaster, all the victims were commemorated in monuments raised in Bishopbriggs and in Lambhill. At long last, they can now be remembered together as one group of people who paid the ultimate price, trying to make a living.